Hi, this is Andy. I've never met a leader who didn't want their company and teams to get better. And most of the time in my experience, I find that leaders aren't necessarily worried about whether or not their people are working hard. Rather, more often the concern is this: are we working on the right stuff? For decades, I've gone through goal setting processes that consume a lot of time and energy. And the process creates plenty of paper, lots of plans, but too often there seems to be a disconnect between what our customers need and what we're spending our time doing. Or once the strategy is decided, we focus on prioritizing output and task completion over whether those efforts will be successful with our customers and improve their business results. Well, today we're going to be talking about OKRs with Jeff Gothelf. Jeff joined us back in episode 310 to talk about his book, Forever Employable. If you haven't listened to that episode, please do. I highly recommend it. Today, we're talking about his newest book. It's entitled Who Does What by How Much? A Practical Guide to Customer-Centric OKRs. Now, you may work at a company that uses OKRs, which is great. But even if you don't, in today's discussion, Jeff will introduce you to OKRs and some of the benefits they provide over typical goal-setting systems. And I'm confident that once you learn more about OKRs and how they work, you'll want to dig in and learn more. And I can't wait to share this discussion with you. A quick note: I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a group of global leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week. It's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into today's discussion with Jeff about his new book, Who Does What by How Much? Jeff, thank you for joining us again on the People and Projects podcast.
It's a pleasure to be back. Andy, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm interested from your perspective, because you've intersected cross industry, across the world. Why do people work on the wrong stuff?
I think it comes down to a few things, right? So sadly, still in 2024, we're dealing with a lot of leftover historical inertia from the industrial manufacturing age, right? So we learned how to manage factories, and then we applied that to companies, and then we applied that to kind of modern business. And in that world, there's a couple things that are in place. First of all, there's a leader, and that leader tends to prescribe what the organization should work on. And then the measure of success for the rest of the organization is, did you produce the thing that the leader prescribed, and did you do it on time and on budget, roughly speaking, right? That's very high level simplification, but that's a lot. That's what's driving a lot of organizations. And I think a lot of leaders see themselves as the person who tells other people what to do. The reality, though, is that we don't live in a manufacturing-based world for the most part, right? We live in a world driven by technology and consumption patterns driven by the usage of technology. And so by the time that we decide what to work on, to the time that it actually comes out in the market, a lot of that consumer demand, a lot of those consumption patterns have moved on, or have shifted, or have changed, or something has happened in the marketplace. And so organizations aren't set up to react to those changes quickly enough, and they're not incentivized to do so. So that's the second part of this, right? The incentives here for a lot of teams is to produce a thing, and then they get measured, rewarded, promoted, et cetera, based on the production of that thing, right? Did you build the new iPhone app? Did you deploy the new learning program? Did you launch the new advertising campaign? Whatever it is that you're working on is measured as completing that task, is measured as success. And rarely do we actually go back and say, well, did anybody actually need that in the first place? Did anybody find it? Did they use it? Did they use it a lot? Did they spend money on it? Did they tell their friends, et cetera? And so it's a combination of historical inertia, corporate culture, and incentives that keep us focused on currently sort of the wrong priorities.
Something I took from your book, and I agree 100% with what you said, is a lot of times the problems are, things like alignment, collaboration, strategy, focus, and those are hard. Yeah. I mean, they're hard to create, they're hard to agree on, they're hard to do. And it's often a combination of all of those that it just seems easier. Prescribe, just do what the boss said, and we lose track of our customers. I think that's something that's easy to do, right? So all that applies. Yeah.
It's so much easier. Look,
Yeah, it's so much easier.
It really is. It's infinitely easier for someone to just tell you what to do. And honestly, look, it's easier for the person telling you what to do. And
Yeah,
for a lot of folks, not everyone, right? But there's a
yeah,
lot of folks who I've come across over the years who are like, just tell me what to do. Like
yeah, yeah.
I'll build whatever you want. I'll design whatever you want. I'll manage whatever project you need. Like whatever you need, I'll do it. And people don't ask questions. It is a lot easier. But inevitably, we end up baking so many assumptions
Yeah.
into those prescribed efforts.
Yeah.
And some of those assumptions are inevitably going to be wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I saw a meme the other day as a product manager. It said, feeling confused, talk to your users. Feeling sad, talk to your users. Feeling happy, talk to your users. Like the answers often go back to the customer. But I got to, I see it in my own self, Jeff. Sometimes I'm like, this is a brilliant idea. It's so easy to fall in love with our press releases, our own ideas, and we lose track of our customers. I think that's it. So I think we need to get to that kind of the heart of what this book is about. And the OKRs. I mean, I'm curious, how do you like to introduce people to what they are and why? And I'm out of curiosity, although I think I know the answer because I read your book, but why do you feel the world needed another book about OKRs?
Okay. So a couple of things. Look, in the book, we describe OKRs as a goal-setting framework, a new way of working, and a culture. I'm going to simplify that for the sake of like when you ask how do you introduce people to OKRs?
Yeah.
For me, it is a customer-centric goal-setting framework for teams.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to explain it, right? So at a high level, that's the punchline. And if you take one step deeper into it, we divide into two parts: objectives and key results. The objective is the qualitative goal that we'd like to see in the future. So what is the sort of the future state of the customer value that we'd like to deliver, and what does that look like in a qualitative way? So you'll hear people say things like the easiest way to shop for groceries online, right? Or the most efficient mortgage application process in the home buying business. Something along those lines, right? Those kinds of qualitative aspirational goals that truly define customer value when you achieve that goal. The key results side are the quantitative side of the conversation, and they answer the question, how do we know that we've achieved the qualitative side, the objective? With the key aspect of key results being that they are measures of human behavior. So the question, what will people be doing differently when we achieve the objective? The answer to that is your key result. And you know you've written a good key result when it literally spells out who does what by how much, which is the name of the book. And that's the reason why the book is called that. So at their highest level, that's what it is. But you'll notice something's missing. That's a goal, right? So a team sets a goal with a qualitative objective and quantitative key results that measure the behavior of the humans that we serve. What's missing from that is a prescribed output, right? There's nothing in that goal that says build this, ship that, launch this, right? Develop that. And that's where this gets really interesting and difficult. But that's at the highest level.
Yeah.
That's what OKRs are.
That's good. Obviously, you've said that before because it's really good. It's very, very clear.
Yeah.
I'm sure. But what are some misconceptions? Because, for example, I'll give you one that I feel like when I was first exposed to it, it's tech. It's only for the tech world.
Yeah.
So can you think of other misconceptions about OKRs that people might file it away under that misconception, but it's not true?
Look, there's a lot of noise out there. And look, I'm super grateful for the folks who invented this concept. So we're talking about Andy Grove at Intel, and then John Doerr, who was there at the time and popularized the idea again in 2016 with his book, Measure What Matters. But the reality is there's like any other framework, there's a variety of different implementation methods and approaches to doing this. And even if you read Measure What Matters, you'll find that there's material in our book that directly disagrees with what Andy Grove and John Doerr put forward initially. And we feel that that's an important evolution of this. But some misconceptions are things like it's just a rebranding of KPIs.
Right.
Isn't this management by objectives all over again? If you're familiar with these terms, this is misconceptions are, this is, yet another way to kind of to squeeze more productivity out of fewer people, things like that. All the kind of the typical resistance that you'll find to any new way of working or any new approach to doing work. And what's interesting about this, and the fact that you brought it up, it's like, oh, this is for tech companies only. Google used it, right? So in Measure What Matters, one of the big examples is Google. Intel, obviously, is sort of the birthplace of this. But the reality is that if you boil that definition that I gave you for OKRs to its simplest concepts, and we talk about this in the book, this idea that the concept that comes out is everybody has a customer. Number one. So what does that mean? That means that every day you go to work and you make something. Now, you may not be the person who makes the thing that your customer uses. Maybe you work in finance and you make a spreadsheet or a budget. Maybe you work in project management and you make a project plan, right? But you make a thing, and there is a human that consumes that thing, right? So somebody uses that thing that you made. How do you know that what you delivered to that human was good, was helpful to them, right? What are the behaviors that you'd like to see in that person to tell you that you've delivered something of value? So everyone's got a customer, and the true measure of the value of the thing that you deliver to your customer is measuring outcomes, meaningful changes in their behavior. And that's really the bottom line. And so that's applicable in tech. Certainly, that's applicable in finance, in real estate, in retail, in healthcare. It's applicable in every scenario because all of us make stuff for other humans to consume at some point.
You use the V word in your response, the word value, and I feel like that's a word that gets thrown around a lot too. So how have you and your co-author Josh learned to define what value means? Because I thought it was kind of clever in the book how you did.
Yeah, it's look, for us, value, and again, I agree with you. I think it's one of the most used and abused words, and generally meaningless at this point. But for us, it's just you're solving a real problem for a real person in a meaningful way. And you know that you've done that when you can see their behavior change in a positive way, right? So they're doing more of something, less, they're doing more of something because they're successful at it. They're spending less time doing something because it's easier, like a mortgage application. They are, more accurately doing something like expense reporting or tracking. All of those things are ways for us to determine that we've delivered something of value. We've solved a real problem for a real person in a meaningful way and have positively impacted their behavior.
I don't know if this applies in every situation, but the 4 steps I remember you saying something along the lines of make them successful, respect their time, solve real problems in meaningful ways, and is a delight to use. And, I just thought that was really interesting because we've been getting a lot of work done around the house. And so I've been assembling, not IKEA, but it's kind of like assembling stuff. Some of the instructions are so bad and is wasting time. And some of them are so good. Jeff, I'm like a new TV that I can't believe how easy they made this. It's just interesting how when you can make someone successful, respect their time, solve real problems, and is a delight to use, man, what a combination, right?
It's incredible. I mean, look, let me give you a really quick example just to kind of illustrate that. There's a company called Typeform. They're, they've been around a long time. I'd say they're kind of still in sort of high growth startup mode. They make forms, like internet forms.
I love their forms though.
Right. And you're like, well, how could that be? How is there even a problem to solve here? The whole internet is nothing but forms.
Google does it for free, for goodness sake, right?
Right, exactly. You've got Google Forms. They make forms easy, delightful, fun to use, fun to create, and that generate higher quality data, right? So if you want people to input data into your forms, you want good data to come in. They make it easier for good data to be input in those forms. And they've been successful for a decade or more simply because they adhere to those principles that you just read out.
You emphasize the importance of thinking of key results as outcomes, if I remember it from the book. So I'm curious, what do you mean by an outcome? And I guess maybe you talked about that a little bit, but what are some positive examples, maybe some negative examples as well? But because I imagine you see plenty of them that are written really well and written kind of poorly too. Sure. So what would be some examples?
So outcomes are measures of human behavior that impact the business.
Mhm.
right? So that's what we want to measure. That's how we know we've delivered something valuable to the people that we serve. They've changed their behavior. So again, kind of continuing on with the examples, we want to see, time spent completing the mortgage application by first-time applicants reduced by 50%.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? That's a really good key result. It's based on an outcome and it answers the question, who does what by how much? First-time home buyers, what are they doing? They're spending time filling out a mortgage application by how much? 50% less. Right? That's how you know you've written a good key result. So we see stuff like that. You can see things like let's say you make a video game site,
Yeah.
right? Something along those lines, right? So regular players increase their weekly gameplay time by 15%. So we're talking about the folks who have an account. We define regular player as whatever, somebody who plays 3 times a week. We want to see their average time spent playing games increase by 15%. Right? That means we're doing something right.
Yeah.
When we see these done poorly, generally speaking, one of two things happen. Either the measure is not of human behavior, but it's actually of system behavior, right? So you'll see something like let's take somebody's building a website, for example, and they'll say, I want to reduce the time it takes to load the homepage by 75%. Okay. There's a metric in there. There's a measure. There's time. That seems about right. Cool. Who does what by how much? Right? Like it breaks immediately.
Yeah.
There's no human. As soon as you say who, there's no human. It's a measure of system behavior. It's not a measure of human behavior, right? The human behavior is what's called bounce rate. Bounce rate is when someone comes to your homepage and then immediately leaves, right? So if your homepage loads faster, you're going to reduce your bounce rate. So we want to reduce our bounce rate, by 25%, for example. That is site visitors bounce off the homepage 25% less. That's a great key result that counteracts sort of the bad key result of system behavior. Because again, look, with stuff like system behavior, you can usually optimize it forever. Like, how do you know when it's enough? The other problem that typically ends up happening with key results is that people will put a task or an action or a deliverable into the key result. So for example, they'll have a key result that says, deliver the project plan by the end of the month, right? Who does what by how much? Project manager delivers the project plan. Okay. By how much? Right. It breaks. Like it breaks. It breaks the model. It's a task, right? It's
almost a milestone.
Yeah, it's a milestone. Exactly. Yeah. It's not an improvement in human behavior, right? Yeah. Project team, for example, project team asks 50% fewer questions quarter over quarter. That's a key result. Is it a good one, a bad one? We can measure, but it answers the question, who does what by how much, right? So if you're writing a really excellent project plan and you're delivering it on time and people understand all of it, they're going to be asking you fewer questions. That's a good indication that you've delivered something of value for someone.
I appreciate you sharing those examples. That really kind of helps to kind of get the idea, because I think what I see a lot is just milestone stuff, this by that. And we don't think about the who enough. Yeah.
Well, I mean, because again, look, I mean, it's so many organizations just managed by task lists.
Right.
Here are all the things the team is going to do this quarter. Great. What have we done this quarter so far? And there's rarely a pause to say, did that have any impact on the people that we serve? Right. It's more like, well, we're 60% through the list. Yeah. So, right. Did you deliver anything of value? That's the most important thing, is to get folks to start to question whether the prescribed work actually solves a real problem for a real person in a meaningful way. And if it doesn't, then we've collected the evidence to justify refocusing our efforts somewhere else. And that's super important.
So people need to get your book to get the full idea of how to implement an OKR system. But I'd love for you to at least give us a taste, Jeff. For example, it seems like the roadmap starts at the organizational level with questions like, what's the major challenge we're facing, or how will we approach that challenge? So if you gave us a flyover, once again, they'll get the details in the book, but where do you start? What does it look like from there?
So ideally, in an ideal world, you're starting with strategy,
Yeah.
right? A clearly articulated, understood, and agreed upon, and broadly distributed strategy for the company, and then ideally for the business unit that you're in or the product that you're working on. That's the ideal state. You can do OKRs without strategy, but when you have strategy, then everyone's pulling in the same direction. You've anchored the organization in the strategy, and we can set goals for various departments and business units, et cetera, around the strategy. So that's key. Ideally, you've got a strategy. And based on that strategy, you want to define some problem spaces to address, right? So what's the problem space we're addressing in this business unit, or for this customer, or for that geography, or for third-party vendors, or whatever it is, right? Like, you want to define these problem spaces, right? For example, today it takes us 90 days to onboard a third-party vendor. By the time we bring them on, the need is so urgent, we need to get them to work. They can't actually meet the demands of the organization. Okay, that's interesting. That's a real problem. Terrific. And then once we've got the problem space, we can start to define the objectives and the key results, right? So the objective is typically the opposite of the problem statement, right? So if you've got a problem statement and you kind of turn it upside down, like, if you solve that problem, not how do you solve the problem, but if you solve the problem, what does that look like? Well, in a world where we solve the problem, onboarding is we're the fastest, company. We're the fastest organization in industrial manufacturing for onboarding third-party vendors by the end of the year, something like that, right? And then, terrific. How do we know that we're the fastest? Well, we're reducing onboarding times from 90 days to 9 days. Something like that, for example. And the amount of complaints that we get from third-party vendors during their first month of operation with us is reduced by 50%, and then some other measure of that as well. But the idea here is, so you're anchored in strategy, you identify a bunch of problem spaces, and then for each one of those problem spaces, you set an objective that essentially reflects the opposite of the problem statement, the positive opposite, if that's a thing, of the problem statement, and then setting those behavior goals to say, this is how we know we've achieved that qualitative future state.
Yeah. And, the roadmap is really clear in the book of how do you go about doing it. It's, I appreciate you introducing it to us. Let's say someone listening to us is intrigued by what they hear about you talking about. And so getting the book is a good next step. What if their overall company doesn't use OKRs? Like, have you seen this work at a lower level, like at even a team or maybe project level?
Absolutely. But I do think that you need to set some expectations with the folks that you are dependent on and are dependent on you. Right? Yeah. If there's a very sort of linear process in your organization, and what your team or your department is going to say, look, we're going to start working a bit differently, because what we haven't talked about, Andy, is kind of what happens after, right? It's really easy when there's a deliverable defined for your team. But when you set a goal with an OKR, the deliverable is variable, right? You've got some ideas, you've got some hypotheses about what you might make and what it might look like and how it might work and how you might market it and position it, et cetera, right? But the reality is, you might be wrong. Your measure of success, again, is not the development and deployment of that thing. It's the behavior change. And so there's going to be a different way of working to support OKRs, which means it's going to be a bit more exploration, a bit more research, discovery, and then iteration, course correction, and sometimes complete about faces. And so I think it's important to give your colleagues who are dependent on you and who you're dependent on a bit of a heads up that says, look, we're going to try a slightly different way of working. It means that we're going to be asking you some different questions. And as you come to us with sort of standard questions, we may push back and say, look, we're going to give you a different answer and see if that helps you, and try to meet you where you need to be as quickly as we can. We try to make you more successful. What I've seen work best is if you can find as independent a team or group of teams as possible, and let them try it together to prove the model in a very, very small scale, and then have other folks look at it and say, wow, that's interesting. You guys are doing it. That's different. And I like what's coming out of this. Let's scale that up to 2 teams, 5 teams, 10 teams, 50 teams, et cetera. That's the ideal situation. So you definitely can start small. You should start small, right? You shouldn't switch everybody anyway. And you can prove the model and then use that evidence to scale up the implementation.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because if somebody goes to an online bookstore, they usually just buy one copy. But could they buy a bulk? Like, could they buy, like, where would they go if they wanted to buy a bulk, like a box of these books or something like that?
Oh, for us, okr-book.com. Super easy. Or just send me an email. But okr-book.com has all the information that you need.
Yeah, I like that idea of a whole team going through it. There's so much we could talk about. I'll wrap it up with this, Jeff. It seems to me that once you really get the value of OKRs, you start looking at the world of work differently, and it's hard to go back. Yeah, like it'd probably be really hard for you to go back to some other approach. So have you considered seeing people use OKRs for goals outside of work, for like life goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important because yes, the short answer to your question is yes. The slightly longer question to your answer to your question is outside of work is the key phrase here, right? One of the things I said at the beginning was OKRs was a goal setting framework for teams, and that's the lowest we want to go inside the organization. But outside of work, you can absolutely set it for personal goals, right? I would like, I'd like to become a marathon runner in the next 2 years. Terrific. What are your key results? Well, I'd like to, get out of bed and run, 50% more times every month than I already do. I'd like to reduce the time it takes me to run a mile by 20% by the end, et cetera, et cetera. All that kind of stuff is great. The tactics that get you there, those are variable, right? But you can absolutely use OKRs for personal growth and personal improvement, 100%.
Yeah, I actually never thought of it until we had this conversation, that there is a bridge between forever employable and this, in the sense of, you get the vision and then how do you go about it? So, hey, for those listening, you've just gotten a very small taste of what's included in Jeff's new book. If you'd like to learn more about customer-centric OKRs, get a copy of Who Does What by How Much. I'll put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Jeff, thank you for joining us again on the People and Projects podcast.
Super happy to be here, Andy. Thank you so much.